One of the big stories of the 2022 Formula 1 season so far is the porpoising struggles of Mercedes. It's costing Mercedes significant lap time, turning F1's dominant force of the past decade into an also-ran. Yet Ferrari's car also suffers from porpoising. During the recent Australian Grand Prix weekend, the Ferrari was bouncing just as aggressively, perhaps even more so, than the Mercedes on the fast run to turn 9. Not that it stopped Charles Leclerc taking pole position and dominating the race to take his second win of the year. So why is the same problem ruining the season for Mercedes while Ferrari is on top? Porpoising is an effect whereby the car bounces thanks to the underfloor aero stalling at high speed. This is because there's a certain velocity where airflow separation occurs, although it can also be triggered by bumps or the floor hitting the ground as the downforce builds. The stall leads to the car rising again, then dropping when the airflow reattaches, then it stalls again, and so on. We delved into this phenomenon in detail in a video released during pre-season testing. As porpoising is connected to high speed, this means it happens primarily on the straights, but in itself it's not necessarily a big issue. Provided the porpoising doesn't damage the car thanks to hitting the track surface too hard, or shake the driver beyond what they can tolerate without injury or discomfort, you can live with it, even though it can cost a little straight line speed. But when it comes to losing lap time, there are two main factors. The first is the performance sacrificed by increasing the ride height to keep the porpoising at an acceptable level. Some teams therefore have to make bigger compromises to achieve the same level of porpoising, losing more downforce. The downforce loss afflicts the car everywhere, because the ride height is also higher in corners where porpoising isn't a concern, meaning the underfloor is not as well sealed throughout the lap. The level of the compromise is dictated not only by preventing the car bouncing too aggressively on the straights, but also controlling at what speed the porpoising kicks in. This will depend on the highest corner speeds at each circuit, hence the setup compromise will vary depending on the track configuration. The second problem is the dynamic effect on the car in the corners. The porpoising can affect braking efficiency, increasing the chances of lockups, and if the car is still bouncing in the corners, the instability will increase the chances of an error or force the driver to be more conservative. Mercedes team principal Toto Wolff said in Australia that this is a key point of difference between the Ferrari and the Mercedes. Albert Park was particularly tricky, with the cars porpoising significantly on the run down to turn 9, which is the first part of a fast left-right sweep. After the race, I asked Lewis Hamilton how the car feels into turn 9, and he explained how unstable the loading and unloading of the car as it bounced made it to drive. Hamilton also said the porpoising wasn't actually too bad in the race, but when pushing to the maximum, particularly in qualifying, it does have a big effect. And all the downforce sacrificed means significantly less performance, with a lap time loss reckoned by Mercedes to be enormous. So both Mercedes and Ferrari are porpoising. In fact, watching the onboard cameras, it seemed the Ferrari was bouncing even more aggressively than the Mercedes. This was supported by data released by F1 on its website, which indicated that at its most severe, the vertical G-force sustained by the Ferrari was actually slightly higher than Mercedes. But the key differences will be twofold. Firstly, Mercedes has compromised its ride height more to get the porpoising down to this level. Ferrari will also have made compromises, but if the Mercedes has increased its ride height more, then it sacrifices far more downforce. Secondly, the Ferrari is more settled in the corners. This is likely because the speed at which the porpoising kicks in is higher than it is for Mercedes. But this isn't only about the aerodynamics of the car, the suspension systems will also play a part in controlling the porpoising and the recovery entering a corner. And with the 2022 cars featuring simplified suspension systems without hydraulic assistance or inerters, Ferrari might also be doing a better job mechanically. So it's not so much about the visible porpoising itself, but how much Mercedes and Ferrari have sacrificed to get it there. We'll delve into the porpoising of Mercedes and Ferrari in more detail in a moment, but first, thanks for watching. If you're enjoying our look at F1 porpoising, hit the thumbs up to show you like it, as it really does help us to do what we do. And to make sure you don't miss any of the races coverage of this thrilling F1 season, subscribe to our channel. So what do we know about Ferrari's troubles? Well, the F175 grabbed the headlines with prodigious porpoising early in testing. Remember the footage F1 released of the car yumping down the main straight? Leclerc admits he's not very sensitive to it despite how violent it looks from onboard footage, so it's not disturbing his driving too much. However, he did say it made turn 9 in Australia a little tricky. Leclerc, like Hamilton, stressed it wasn't a problem in the race, but he indicated he could feel it in turn 9 in qualifying. But even so, it's clear the Ferrari was settling down in that corner far more quickly than the Mercedes did. But ominously for the competition, Ferrari also has performance to unlock if it can eliminate the porpoising limitation. Ferrari introduced no significant upgrades during the first 3 events of the season, save for a low downforce rear wing introduced in Jeddah. But in Friday practice in Australia, Leclerc ran a modified diffuser. This featured what Ferrari described as a packer. The packer is effectively a temporary modification to the shape of the undersurface of the diffuser. In this case, it was applied in the centre of the diffuser. This allowed Ferrari to gather data on the modification without committing to making a new floor. It was removed on Saturday because it was just a test item to inform future updates, but it shows Ferrari is working on it. However, Ferrari team principal Mattia Binotto has said not to expect any significant upgrades for the next race at Imola. After all, it's a sprint weekend, meaning there is just one free practice session before the teams and drivers head into qualifying, and therefore little time to test and understand new parts. Binotto has stressed porpoising is something Ferrari wants to reduce, but that it's not straightforward, and attempts will be made to further mitigate it at Imola. So Ferrari, like many teams, hasn't defeated porpoising. It simply got it more under control. Mercedes initially appeared confident it would be able to solve its porpoising problems, which really kicked in when it upgraded its car at the second test with the introduction of the slimline side pods relatively quickly. The talk was of big performance gains to come once porpoising was under control, and the theoretical downforce level of the car is significant. But hypothetical performance isn't of much use, as the real downforce level of the car has to be considered what is usable, rather than what's there if the car could run low enough to generate it. Wolff said in Australia that there is no magic bullet, and after finishing third in Melbourne, George Russell warned there's nothing substantial in the pipeline in terms of upgrades, so the fix isn't going to happen overnight. The solution could lie in multiple areas. It's suggested that the Mercedes floor is flexing too much, potentially requiring significant reconfiguring of the W13. It's even been argued that the shape of the gearbox, in the case of the Mercedes, shorter than Ferrari's, could be a factor, as well as the structure of the side pods. If we could tell you exactly what the problem was, then we'd not only be working for Mercedes right now, we'd also be far cleverer than the combined might of its technical team. But what is clear is Mercedes knows it's got a problem, has made some progress in understanding it, but is still working on the solution. And then the question is, how long will it take to implement that? Mercedes is 49 points behind Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship, with George Russell 37 points behind Leclerc in the drivers' standings. With 20 races to go, those gaps aren't impossible to bridge. But given it's still going to take time for Mercedes to solve its problems, with Ferrari also hoping to make gains and Red Bull among the teams least afflicted by porpoising, time is against it if it's to have a chance even of being an outside contender for the title in 2022.